The topic I have chosen to study using the concepts we have learned in genetics is dogs. I work at an animal shelter and interact with dogs almost every day, so applying their unique traits and personalities to genetics is very relevant and interesting to me. I will introduce and examine a few particular dogs I have gotten to know at the shelter and apply 3 main ideas we have learned over the course of genetics, which include monohybrid crosses from Chapter 3, the concepts of incomplete and codominance from Chapter 5, and the idea of artificial selection from Chapter 24. By applying these concepts to dogs and their different characteristics, we will be able to see what potential matings between these dogs could look like. In Chapter 3, we learned about monohybrid crosses. Monohybrid crosses are crosses between parents that differ in a single characteristic. By using a Punnett square, we can predict the phenotypic ratios of the offspring of the parents, or the F1 generation. If a trait exhibits complete dominance, the F1 generation should resemble only one of the two parents. Then, if we self-cross the F1 generation, the F2 generation should result in both parental traits with a 3-to-1 ratio. In Chapter 5, we learned the meanings of incomplete and codominance. Incomplete dominance is when the heterozygote's phenotype falls between the two homozygote phenotypes. Codominance is when the phenotype of the heterozygote is not intermediate, but simultaneously expresses the phenotypes of both homozygotes. In Chapter 24, we learned about artificial selection, which is promoting the reproduction of organisms with traits that are perceived as desirable. So by selecting a female and male to mate that both have a desired trait, we can intentionally produce offspring that are phenotypically desirable. This is Chevy and Loki. Both are husky mixes. If we were to breed them together, what might their offspring look like? Let's say that Chevy's black fur is dominant over Loki's peppered black and white fur. If capital B is the dominant allele for black fur and lowercase b is the recessive allele giving peppered fur, and both Chevy and Loki are true breeding for their fur colors, we can estimate the phenotypic ratios of their offspring using a monohybrid cross. As you can see, mating Chevy and Loki would produce an F1 generation of all black fur because all offspring would be heterozygotes. If we then self-cross the F1 generation, 1/4 of the F2 generation would have Loki's peppered fur. This is Florence and Clyde. What would their offspring look like if Florence's brown fur exhibited incomplete dominance or if the brown and white fur colors were codominant? Let's say that big R is the allele for brown fur and little r is the allele for white fur, and assume that Florence and Clyde are both true breeding for their fur colors. As we saw in the previous monohybrid cross, all F1 offspring will be heterozygotes. If Florence's brown fur exhibits incomplete dominance, heterozygous offspring will most likely have tan fur or any fur color that is intermediate between brown and white. If the brown and white fur alleles are codominant, then the heterozygous offspring would most likely have brown and white spots, showing both fully expressed fur colors. Now let's consider artificial selection. This is Nona and Aries, both are pit bull mixes. Let's say that we want to select for pit bull mixes with longer tails. We can use population genetics to predict the results of artificial selection. Let's say that the population mean for pit bull tail length is 7 inches, and Nona's tail length is 10 inches, and Aries' tail length is 12 inches, giving a parental average of 11 inches. By knowing the narrow sense heritability of pit bull tail length, which is a statistic that determines the resemblance between parents and offspring, we can calculate the average tail length of Nona and Aries' offspring. Say that the narrow sense heritability is 0.85, which gives us an offspring average of 10.4 inches, much longer than the population average, indicating successful artificial selection for longer tails in pit bulls. Relating what we have learned in genetics to potential matings between dogs really helped me see the importance of knowing how genes and inheritance works in the real world. Genetics can be applied to the living world all around us, and it is very relevant to be able to apply the principles of genetics to real-life situations like the dog breedings I presented. I hope you enjoyed.